Hello, YouTube. Welcome back to another book review from me, your humble narrator, Logan Albright. And today I'm going to talk about a collection of science fiction short stories that I picked up at a used bookstore. And let me give a little background. I love short stories. I think short stories are awesome. A lot of my favorite writers are short story writers. I love Philip K. Dick's short stories. I love Isaac Asimov's. I love Arthur C. Clarke's. I love Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, Shirley Jackson, Robert Aikman. There's just an endless list of great short story writers who I really admire. And I was in a used bookstore and I wanted to try like a new science fiction writer. I've been reading a lot of Robert Heinlein lately, and I feel like that's getting boring for the channel, although I do have another one coming up pretty soon. And I wanted to do something a little bit different. And so I was just looking through what was on offer, and I saw this author, Roger Zelazny, which I think is how you say his name. And I'd heard of him, but I'd never read anything by him. He's apparently the author of this series, which is really highly regarded. They didn't have the first entry in the series. They only had the last entry in the series, and I'm not going to read that. So the only other book they had by him that was like a standalone was this one, which is called Frost and Fire. And it's a collection of his short stories published in 1989, and the stories go back as far as 1984. And I think science fiction is like the best genre for the short story, or rather the short story is the best form for the science fiction genre. I've talked about this a little before. I think the reason short stories and science fiction go so well together is that a short story can be propelled by a single idea and carried to full execution through just a single idea that's really good and clever. And you can't do that with a novel. With a novel, you have to have characters and you have to have an arc, and you can't just have one idea. But a short story can be propelled by one idea, and that's what science fiction is all about. It's about ideas. And so most of the best short stories that I've read have been science fiction short stories, and most of my favorite short story writers are science fiction short story writers. And so I thought, all right, good. I have a new writer to read. I'm going to read Roger Zelazny's Frost and Fire and check out all these short stories. A couple of them are Hugo Award winning, which is one of the most prestigious awards in science fiction. It's got a couple of endorsements on the back, one from Paul Anderson, who I really like. So very promising start. Now, this is a hard review to do because it's always hard to talk about a book when you just don't have that much to say about it. And this is sort of one of those mediocre reviews that I don't really like doing, but I'm at this point in the channel, I'm kind of reviewing everything that I read. So I thought I'd talk about it anyway, even though this is a 3-star book, maybe 2 stars. But 1-star reviews are fun. You get to rail against something you hate. 5-star reviews are fun. You get to extol the virtues of something you love. 3 2-star reviews, kind of dull and boring, and there's not that much to say, which is why you don't see that many of those reviews like on online review sites. But if you're being thorough and consistent, which I'm trying to be, you review everything. And so you have to say, even the things that were kind of mediocre, you have to talk about. Now, a couple of the stories in here I thought were pretty good. There's a Hugo Award-winning story called Permafrost about an adventurer on the face of this icy planet going back after all these years, and he had abandoned a girl there before, and he's kind of going back to the same place to do some treasure hunting with a new girl. And that's a really good story. I like that one. But the rest of them I thought were a little bit tired, a little bit played out. There's like a standard artificial intelligence story about a computer that's like turned evil and is going after its master. There's a vampire story. There's some of the stories are kind of fantasy that I didn't find that inspired. There was a story about kind of like wizards and magic that I quite liked. I thought was pretty good. But for the most part, the stories were sort of middle of the road. They weren't that memorable to me. And I think, this is 1989. This is past the golden age of science fiction. And I guess it's hard, like most of these themes have been explored. Like it's hard to do an original vampire story in 1989. It's already been explored so well. It's hard to do an original artificial intelligence story in 1989. It's already been, Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and all these guys did so much with artificial intelligence earlier in the century that it's hard to come up with something new. But I just didn't find these stories that inspired. They're also peppered throughout with a series of essays that he wrote, and some are kind of like combination stories and essays, and I found that to be a little strange, kind of like padding. Like it doesn't seem like you needed to put essays in here. You could just do a short story collection. An essay collection would be a different thing. So to me, that felt a little lazy, a little like padding. And then there's introductions to each of the stories, which I really like. I like the author to introduce each of the stories and explain his writing process, his thinking process, what inspired the story, what he thinks about the story after having it published some years later and looking back on it. I love that kind of thing. I love writers talking about their own work. So it was really cool that Roger Zelazny has little introductions, but the introductions seem to have kind of a bad attitude, in my view. He seemed to not really like a lot of these stories. He seemed to resent writing them. There's some he like wrote for charity or wrote for friends and stuff, and he's like, I didn't really want to write this, but I had to, and someone paid me to write this. It's my job, so I had to write it, but I didn't really want to. And you kind of see a lack of passion for the craft in there. He treats it like a day job, and which it is. Writing is a profession; it's a job like any other. I think it's a mistake to view it as this sort of high art that you do when you're inspired, and it's all done for the love of the game, and it's not done for money. Like, I'm a writer myself. Writing is a job. You sit down and you do it, and you turn out the words. And even if I don't believe in writer's block. If you can't think of what to write and you have writer's block, you have to write anyway. I appreciate that, but he just seemed kind of bitter and resentful, and like he didn't really feel good about his stories and didn't really like writing them and resented having to write them. In which case, like, why are you a writer as your job? Seems kind of strange. So I didn't really click with the author as a person in terms of his introductory matter and the introductions to each of the stories that he wrote. And I didn't really click with the stories because I thought that they were a little bit bland and uninspired. And it's odd because there's a couple of the things on the back here say that he's like one of the best short story writers in science fiction. And I just don't see that. I see so many better sci-fi short story writers than Roger Zelazny. So, it's an okay book of short stories, but it's certainly not one that I would really recommend. I would recommend so many other books. I also wanted to mention Lord Dunsany as an author of fantasy short stories who I really love, and I forgot to bring him up earlier. But I would recommend so many other short story writers before I'd come to Roger Zelazny. Now, perhaps his novels are better. Like I said, I heard good things about this series, which I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, but he's famous for this series, and maybe that's more inspired and better. Maybe this is sort of a latter day short story collection that he was rushed out, and it was sort of leftovers and not his best stories, and maybe that's why he's not enthusiastic about it. Maybe I just picked the wrong book to start with Roger Zelazny. So that's something I'm going to need you guys to help me with in the comments down below. Let me know if you've read Roger Zelazny. Let me know if you like his work, what books are the best, what books are the worst. Have you read Frost and Fire, and do you have opinions on it? I looked at some of the reviews on Goodreads, and there were some 5-star reviews, people who really loved it. And there were some less favorable reviews, including my own. And I'm interested to know what people think, because to me, this just doesn't stand up to the greats of science fiction, and it's kind of milquetoast and kind of middle of the road, and it's not something I'm eager to get back to. But let me know in the comments what you think. I'd love to hear your opinions. That's all I have to say about Frost and Fire. I'm going to be starting a new kind of series of things that I hope you'll find interesting next week at the start of October, because this is my favorite time of year. I always try to do something special for October for the channel, so stay tuned for that. Next week I'm going to have the beginning of something that's a little bit different than what I normally do, and I'm hoping that you will find that enjoyable and interesting, and we can go through that journey together, because man, isn't this time of year great? The weather's changing, it's starting to get colder outside, the leaves are turning. It's just the best time of year that there is. So stay tuned for that. Leave a comment down below, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Love all the new subscribers. It's always so wonderful to see you here. It's a delight. So please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and then I will catch you next week. I try to upload at least once a week, and usually on Wednesdays, and I'll be back next time. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you later.